Lorraine Duncan-Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to try and keep my my words brief because so much of this has already been laid out by my colleagues, so I see no reason why I can't repeat it. In essence, this whole thing falls onto a couple of stools, but there are some intervening issues here. I say to the honourable gentleman who we've been to Ukraine together and I have a very high regard for him, and the government should ought to put him on their front bench as soon as possible because he'll make less of a mess of it than the others. But I simply say to him, well, it's a compliment. Having been in government myself, I have to tell you that's quite a compliment.
It's all over now.
Ministers go. But anyway, I say this because he talked about ambiguity, quite rightly, sometimes determined ambiguity and sometimes inadvertent ambiguity. We have the situation in the South China Seas where China has, against international law and condemned by the UN, absolutely and clearly, they have no right to that area at all, historic or otherwise, but the Chinese have ignored that and are now putting defensive forts in the area. We've seen the Chinese now threaten the Philippines to barge their boats out of the way, to fire shots over them, and the same goes for Vietnam, who all lay a certain amount of claim to the area. But they've ignored all that. They're threatening Taiwan, and the one thing they do want to do is to extend that position out to the trade routes. If the Chinese government can get control of the trade routes going east-west, which, strangely enough, flow right past the Chagos Islands, then that would be an absolute win for them, so they would be able to choke the trade going east-west at any time they wish. And if people think, well, they wouldn't do that, would they? Oh, yes, they would. They are talking about now blockading Taiwan as a part of that process. So I know he's a realist, and on that basis, I simply say we need to look at the Chagos Islands and to look at this treaty in light of the threat to the free world that is growing in plain sight by this unbelievably brutal but enormous growing power. And it's worth reminding ourselves that the Chinese are building a navy which even US experts accept will outgrow the US naval forces within 2 years. And this is really important. Any one shipyard in China today builds more naval ships than the whole of the United States of America and probably Europe as well. And they have many naval shipyards. So the threat, I'll give way.
I'm most grateful to my honourable friend. Something I didn't touch on. I spoke about the naval problem, but also China have built an incredible number of ICBM silos. They're hugely increasing their nuclear arsenal. They refuse to come to the table for negotiations on non-proliferation treaties. Is it not the most ridiculous time that you would give up the certainty of being able to house nuclear weapons at a strategic site?
Well, I'm going to come on to this, and he's right. I just wanted to set the background information about what the problem is. The problem is China. And China, remember, supports Russia. So the very idea that a British citizen, Philippe Sands, in this case, representing Mauritius, actually negotiates and talks to the Russians about how this would not make it difficult for them to hold on to Crimea is astounding to me. To even engage with them on this is astonishing as well. So that tells you that the nature of some of those people involved in this is really questionable indeed. And so the background is, what is the threat? And the threat is greater than it has been, you could argue now, I think, at any time since the Second World War, and certainly now since the end of the Cold War. We are in a new environment, and that new environment requires us to understand the nature of our assets and how we would maximize those assets, not minimize them.
Yes.
So my argument here is slightly different. It is, we have taken the wrong decision over Chagos for the wrong reasons. If we had stepped back and asked ourselves in 10 years, 5 years' time, or even in 2 years' time, when China is estimated to have a more powerful fleet in the Pacific than the US can muster at any stage, then really would we say that we ought to let the Chagos Islands go and put in the hands of Mauritius, Mauritius, who China lauds in almost every announcement that it makes, and has a very good relationship with it. Okay.
And actually, even if we accept the government position that actually Mauritius don't get on particularly well with China, are we really resting in the hands of fate that they might change their minds 50 years from now and seek to line up with their sphere of influence? It's a huge gamble to take.
He's absolutely right, and I agree with him fundamentally. And I'm sorry, in a way, today that the the Right Honourable Member for Cardiff South and Penarth is not here. Not that I have any particular view, detrimental view of the Right Honourable Gentleman who's there now, forgive me, but I worry why he isn't here. I hope he's not suffering from long Chagos, and therefore maybe we should send him a get-well card very soon. We miss him. Because that is definitely studied ambivalence at the dispatch box as a master plan, I'm sure of it. But I simply say now, on this treaty, we know now, because of yesterday, it's been said by a number of colleagues, and I just repeat it here, that we know now, yesterday, if we needed to know it at all, that the Deputy Prime Minister of Mauritius has made it categorically clear, categorically clear, there will be no allowance for nuclear weapons either parked or landed on the islands of Chagos while this treaty exists and while they have that. Now, I don't know about studied ambivalence, which the Honourable Gentleman did talk about quite rightly. I didn't think there was any ambivalence about his statement. He's completely clear, and yet we are ambivalent. And ambivalence for us is a mistake because it allows the statements of fact to be presented by those who will take control of Chagos. That is not just a mistake, but a disastrous mistake. I think my honourable friend wants to give it.
I think there's a further twist on this, because it's not only that the Pelindaba Treaty prohibits the storing of nuclear weapons on the territory of Mauritius, which the Chagos Islands would become, but the treaty requires an inspection regime. Yes. And the country, I understand, which would be carrying out the inspection is South Africa. And South Africa is somewhat closer to China and Russia, particularly where naval cooperation is concerned, than it is towards America or the United Kingdom.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, as he normally is. And the reality is that this treaty that he refers to is very clear about those who are signatories to it. They have no choice to modify it. They must agree categorically not to have nuclear weapons on their territory. And we are in the business of giving that territorial right over to Mauritius, so therefore it will apply to Chagos. No question at all. And that brings me also to the other bit which the government simply doesn't seem to face up to, is that this arrangement or treaty in 1966 between the USA and the UK absolutely is clear, and I want to quote this. It states what the government calls an exchange of letters, but this is actually a treaty. So it obfuscates it when you talk about an exchange of letter. It sounds like a get-well card or something you put in the post. Oh, it's not a big problem. We just exchange a few letters to each other. How are you? Getting on fine. What about us? We're just going to give the islands away. Are you okay with that? We're okay with that. No problems. Can you give us a bit more detail? We will when it's all passed. Don't worry about it. We'll be with you on this. No, it is a treaty. It has the substance of being a treaty. And the substance of that treaty states categorically, the territory shall remain under the United Kingdom sovereignty. Now, we can't arbitrarily change that. We have to have full agreement from the USA that that is the case. And I do not believe now that the United States really understood that the nature of this was that they wouldn't have sovereign rights over the base. And I don't think the government ever even bothered to explain it, because I seem to recall that when this whole debate began, this was never mentioned. Not one moment did the government come forward and say, yes, we're going to get this bill through, but look, it's not in the bill, but I tell you what, we'll exchange letters with you afterwards, because although it's relevant and it's completely sovereign, we don't want to talk about it. So the government has to explain, when the minister gets to his feet, why they never made any significant mention of this at all. because this has a massive bearing on now what happens to this really poor treaty, badly drafted, hurriedly written, and only of a few pages long. I have to tell you, I've sat through the Maastricht Treaty, we're rebelling, of course, but the reality was, throughout all of that, it was huge. And every aspect of our arrangements was in there and debatable and amendable. It has been horrific to watch how fast the government wants to get this through. And I honestly say that this is madness. And I just want to come quickly to the cost. The other bit that is completely wrong is the government's desire to show how little they've had to pay for this to get what they consider to be a reasonable lease. The government's now moving against leaseholders. Isn't it ironic here in the UK? They do not like leases. Apparently there are not enough power over those leases. And I simply say to the government, I say, learn from your own views about what's happening domestically. The lease is a terrible thing at times because it gives you so little control. This is going to be a lease. I will, of course.
He's making an excellent speech, and if he were not already sanctioned by the Chinese, he would be by the end of it. Does he recall that Disraeli said in opposition that we may not win the vote tonight, but we can win the argument? And does he agree with me that we are not only winning the argument, but the government are failing by not answering any questions to make any actual argument at all?
Indeed. In fact, I would say that rather than us winning the argument, the government has simply lost the argument, which is even, in a way, more powerful because they're making no effort to explain it. And I feel sorry, honestly, for the ministers. I've sat in government and, you know, you're sent out to bat and to defend the indefensible, and you have to do it well. And I say to the honourable gentleman that I have a high regard for him, as he knows, and good luck on this one tonight. In fact, he'll need to make it brief because we will intervene. I simply say, though, that the cost is nonsense. And my honourable friend brilliantly laid it out. So I won't repeat the specifics, but I will simply say, as I said to him, having sat in government, and I know how these figures are put together, and there is no way on earth that a government should rightly use net present value for a foreign treaty over a period of over 90 years. It is an absurdity. We have no control over their social obligations in Mauritius. They may shift them and change them. We have no control over what their economic policy will be, thus inflation in this. We have no control over that. It can only really be used for domestic issues. And I think this is a shimmy by the government to try and get the cost down, absurdly, to 3.4 billion, when in fact it's 34.7. And that's probably wrong. I think it's probably wrong because I think it will be more than that over the long term. So this is another absurdity and an excuse to be got rid of. And I want to end on this one particular point, which is, as all the other points have been made, and I won't dwell on them, but I do want to dwell on this. It was wrong in 1966 when we chucked the Chagosians off their island. It was a bad decision. It was an immoral decision. And governments make this, and we need to own up to that fact. My government should have done, and I think we should today own up to this fact, that we owe the Chagosians something better. Now, the Right Honourable Gentleman speaks for the Liberal Democrats, has talked about a referendum. I absolutely think that's one of the possibilities. But I tell you what I would do if I was in government. I'd say, listen, we're not going to do the deal with Mauritius. We'll do the deal with you, the Chagosians, over the islands. And you will be allowed back to those islands with full rights, and we'll negotiate with you how we work together with British control overall, but with you being paid. I'd rather pay that money to them so they can live their lives better than do Mauritius. And we know, by the way, that Chagosians, many of them had terrible problems in Mauritius, have been treated like second-class citizens. Right. We know that the United Nations Committee on Racial Discrimination has come out and said this treaty should not go ahead for those reasons. And I agree with that. So there is both a factual problem with this and a human rights problem, and overarching all, a threat to the freedom of ourselves and those in the free world. And if we give way on this, if we let this go through, if we do not correct, change and end the nonsense of this, we will forever have that over our heads as you lost control of the most critical area in the world.
Andrew Rossing.